速読英単語1必修編
Unit 1. Reading has its rules. A perfect knowledge of a few writers and a few subjects is more valuable than a superficial one of a great many. The fine points of a piece of writing are seldom apparent at first reading. In youth, one should search among books as one searches the world for friends, and once these friends are found, chosen, and adopted, one must go into retirement with them. Intimacy with Montaigne, Balzac, or Proust would be enough to enrich one's whole life. In one's reading, great writers of the past must be given the most attention. Of course, it is both natural and necessary to be familiar with those of the present, for it is among them that we are likely to find friends who have our own anxieties and requirements. But let us not drown ourselves in a sea of insignificant books. Masterpieces are already so numerous that we can never know them all. Let us have faith in the choice of past centuries.
Unit 2. You know you have to read between the lines to get the most out of anything. I want to persuade you to do something equally important in the course of your reading. I want to persuade you to write between the lines. Unless you do, you are not likely to do the most efficient kind of reading. You shouldn't mark up a book which isn't yours. Librarians or your friends who lend you books expect you to keep them clean, and you should. If you decide that I am right about the usefulness of marking books, you will have to buy them. Most of the world's great books are available today in reprint editions at less than $5. If reading is to accomplish anything more than passing time, it must be active. You can't let your eyes glide across the lines of a book and come up with an understanding of what you have read. Now, an ordinary piece of light fiction, like, say, Gone with the Wind, doesn't require the most active kind of reading. The books you read for pleasure can be read in a state of relaxation, and nothing is lost. But a great book, rich in ideas and beauty, a book that raises and tries to answer great fundamental questions, demands the most active reading of which you are capable.
Unit 3. The major criticisms of television in relation to children are that it is a time waster, that it causes children to be frightened unnecessarily, and that it encourages violence. The television set is sometimes used by parents as a babysitter or childminder, and there is no doubt that it can be very effective in keeping children quiet. However, used in this way, it involves unselected and time-wasting viewing. But criticism on this count should be raised against parents, not children, who may well be sucked into a program almost by hypnosis, when they would have been very happy to undertake constructive play. I was so concerned by the risks of time wasting that I denied my children a television set for some years. It was their argument which convinced me I was wrong when they told me that at school they were non-contemporary. "Daddy, we can't take part in the discussions with other children about TV programs." They had the set the next day. Obviously, television is a potential time waster for children, as it is for adults. But I now feel this to be less of a problem for children than I used to think, although I believe it is a time waster for many adults.
Unit 4. Nobody starts off stupid. You have only to watch babies and infants and think seriously about what all of them learn and do to see that they show a desire and ability to learn, which in an older person you might well call genius. Hardly an adult in 1,000 or 10,000 could in any 3 years of his life learn as much as every infant learns in his first 3 years. But what happens as we get older to this extraordinary capacity for learning and intellectual growth? What happens is that it is destroyed, and more than by any other one thing, by the process that we misname education, a process that goes on in most homes and schools. We adults destroy most of the intellectual and creative capacity of children by the things we do to them or make them do. We destroy this capacity, above all, by making them afraid of not doing what other people want, of making mistakes, of failing, of being wrong. We destroy the disinterested love of learning in children, which is so strong when they are small, by encouraging and compelling them to work for petty rewards, test papers marked 100, or A's on report cards. In short, for the mere satisfaction of feeling that they are better than someone else.
Unit 5. It is language, more obviously than anything else, that distinguishes man from the rest of the world. At one time, it was common to define man as a thinking animal, but we can hardly imagine thought without words. Not thought that is at all precise, anyway. More recently, man has often been described as a tool-making animal. But language itself is the most remarkable tool that man has invented, and is the one that makes all the others possible. The most primitive tools, admittedly, may have come earlier than language. The higher apes sometimes use sticks for digging, and have even been observed to break sticks for this purpose. But more complicated tools demand the kind of human cooperation and division of labor, which is hardly possible without language. Language, in fact, is the great tool which makes human culture possible.
Unit 6. Learning another language is important because it enables us to communicate with people in a different country and to learn more about that culture. But the real importance of learning another language goes even deeper. It makes us realize the relativity of our values, be they cultural or linguistic. In this way, we come to understand that our way of looking at reality is not the only way, that our values may not be the only ones. Learning a foreign language is a double experience. As we learn about the new language, this new knowledge makes us discover more about our own language. Speaking only one language can be compared to living in a room with no windows and no doors. It is safe, but it is dark and closed. A foreign language brings new light into the room. With an elementary knowledge, we can look out the windows and see a new, different world. With a thorough knowledge, we can walk out the door and explore this new, different world. The discoveries we make add richness and depths to our lives. As we explore this new world, we begin to understand the magnitude of language, the greatest of man's creations.
Unit 7. Languages do not exist in a vacuum, but are powerfully affected by social, economic, religious, and technical change. If a great many more people are studying Russian today than was the case only 20 years ago, this is not due solely to the intrinsic merits of that very interesting language, but to the dramatic rise in status and power of the Soviet Union. The similar tremendous increase in political, military, and economic strength of the United States has inevitably led to heightened respect for the American ways of doing things. And since it so happens that most of the world's films are made by Americans, there exists in the cinema a perfect channel for the passage of Americanisms into the English of Great Britain, though of course industry, advertising, and the press also play their part in this respect. While television is so wasteful of material that the BBC is obliged to make use of a great amount of American film. This vigorous stream of Americanisms must inevitably make some impression on the language of Britain, the more so as American standards of comfort and success are on the increase there.
Unit 8. When you read a text in a foreign language, you frequently come across words you do not fully understand. Sometimes you check the meaning in a dictionary, and sometimes you guess. The strategy you adopt depends very much upon the degree of accuracy you require and the time at your disposal. If you are the sort of person who tends to turn to the dictionary frequently, it is worth remembering that any dictionary has its limitations. Each definition is only an approximation, and one builds up an accurate picture of the meaning of a word only after meeting it in a variety of contexts. It is also important to recognize the special dangers of dictionaries which translate from English into Japanese and vice versa. If you must use a dictionary, it is usually far safer to consult an English one.
Unit 9. In most exams, you are not permitted to use a dictionary. Even if you are allowed to use one, it is very time-consuming to look up words, and time in exams is usually limited. You are therefore forced to guess the meaning of unfamiliar words. When you meet unknown words in an exam text, it is very easy to panic. However, if you develop efficient techniques for guessing the meaning, you overcome a number of possible problems and help yourself to understand far more of the text than you at first thought likely. Two strategies which may help you to guess the meaning of a word are using contextual clues, both within the sentence and outside, making use of clues from the formation of the word. You may also find it helpful to compare the unknown word with similar words in your own language. This can be misleading, however, so you should use these other strategies to confirm your guess.
Unit 10. A conversation not only requires you to work out who you are and to some extent what you are doing, but it also demands that you perform. It is a piece of theater. There is a real sense in which each of the participants in a conversation plays out a part in an ongoing action or drama. Each consciously or unconsciously plays a role. Each must have a sense of both character and event. Each must choose a self or face to present and relate to the selves and faces of others. What is remarkable about this kind of theater is that you must fundamentally invent something to fit an immediate need in nature. Each scene or episode is a new creation. We must have learned rules or principles for constructing such scenes, for otherwise they would not be the reasonably coherent entities they are. And, in following these rules or principles, we know that we must not be too theatrical. That is, we must not draw the attention of others to the rules we are following. We must act out the parts we choose to create for ourselves, but we must not overact them.
Unit 11. Keeping up a role can be quite a delicate affair, for even an apparently trivial matter can damage a role if one is not secure. A new radio or television announcer may get quite upset when something goes wrong in the studio, and he or she is left to deal with it quickly. A misplaced page in one's lecture notes can be very stressful for an inexperienced teacher or lecturer. Forgetting what you are going to say after managing to get the floor in a meeting can be quite embarrassing. In each case, experience may eventually tell you how to manage the situation so as to keep up a role. Perhaps one of the best examples of role maintenance in difficult circumstances was shown when Queen Elizabeth carried on perfectly normally when someone fired a starting pistol near her while she rode on horseback through London. She never faltered in her role, one she has now played with great success for over 3 decades.
Unit 12. The remarkable story of how English spread within predominantly English-speaking societies like the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand is not unique. The truly significant development, which has occurred only in the last 100 years or so, is the use of English by 300 or 400 million people for whom it is not a native language. English has become a second language in countries where it is used for administration, broadcasting, and education. In these countries, English is a vital alternative language, often unifying huge territories and diverse populations. Then, there is English as a foreign language, used in countries where it is backed up by a tradition of English speaking, or where it has been more recently adopted. Here, it is used to have contact with people in other countries, usually to promote trade and scientific progress, but to the benefit of international communication generally. The emergence of English as a global phenomenon, as either a first, second, or foreign language, has recently inspired the idea that we should talk not of English, but of many Englishes, especially in third world countries where the use of English is no longer part of the colonial legacy, but the result of decisions made since independence.
Unit 13. The best way to learn another language is to live among people who don't speak yours. To get your needs adequately attended to, you would have to learn theirs. And if theirs were all you heard day and night, you would soon acquire a familiarity with it, if not exactly a mastery over it. At least enough to make it through the day without too much difficulty. This would be of great benefit to you, because you would be at home in at least 2 cultures. But the greatest benefit still would be the insight it would give you into your own culture, the one you had temporarily left behind. You would be able to look at American customs and traditions, politics and art, and even listen to American music in a new light, and with a depth of understanding you did not know was possible. You would not realize it either, but you would have begun the study of civilizations. Many contemporary peoples have lives which are unique. A desert Arab, an African pygmy, a Peruvian mountaineer, a native New Yorker, though basically the same human animal, have little in common. Indeed, almost nothing they could discuss. It has not been sufficiently recognized that cultural differences go very deep, as deep probably as the organism itself. It would not be hard to accept the truth of this statement if you were to compare the behavior of a New Guinea native with that of a sophisticated Londoner.
Unit 14. Speech seems as natural to man as walking, and only less so than breathing. Yet this naturalness of speech is but an illusory feeling. The process of acquiring speech is an utterly different sort of thing from the process of learning to walk. In the case of the latter function, culture, in other words, the traditional body of social usage, is not seriously brought into play. The child is individually equipped by the complex set of factors that we term biological heredity to make all the needed muscular and nervous adjustments that result in walking. Indeed, the very conformation of these muscles and of the appropriate parts of the nervous system may be said to be primarily adapted to the movements made in walking. In a very real sense, the normal human being is predestined to walk, not because his elder brothers will assist him to learn the art, but because his organism is prepared from birth to take on all those expenditures of nervous energy and all those muscular adaptations that result in walking. To put it concisely, walking is an inherent biological function of man. Not so language. It is of course true that in a certain sense the individual is predestined to talk, but that is due entirely to the circumstance that he is born not merely in nature, but in the lap of a society that is certain to lead him to its traditions. Eliminate society, and there is every reason to believe that he will learn to walk, but it is just as certain that he will never learn to talk, that is, to communicate ideas according to the traditional system of a particular society.
Unit 15. Now and again I have had horrible dreams, but not enough of them to make me lose my delight in dreams. To begin with, I like the idea of dreaming, of going to bed and lying still, and then, by some queer magic, wandering into another kind of existence. As a child, I could never understand why grown-ups took dreaming so calmly, when they could make such a fuss about any holiday. This still puzzles me. I am mystified by people who say they never dream, and appear to have no interest in the subject. It is much more astonishing than if they said they never went out for a walk. Most people, or at least most Western Europeans, do not seem to accept dreaming as part of their lives.
Unit 16. Dream researchers have ascertained that all human beings dream an average of 1.5 hours every night. Over the course of an average lifetime, each of us spends about 4 years in that other dimension. Because few people in industrial Western culture understand its language, most of our entire civilization has fallen into the trap of assuming that nothing useful happens in that other world. To those diligent or talented dream-farers who have unlocked its secrets, however, the dream world is a gateway to knowledge and power. The reason we forget, the moment we open our eyes, the lessons we receive from these inner institutes of enlightenment is deceptively simple. We forget our dreams because nobody taught us how to remember, and because our waking consciousness depends upon a kind of selective inattention to interior senses. There are many time-tested ways for retaining the inner attention process. The knowledge has existed for thousands of years, but it is only now beginning to emerge from obscurity.
Unit 17. Several theories have been presented about why we forget things. Common sense tells us that our memories simply wear out if we don't use them. This is called the decay through disuse theory. In spite of the common sense appeal of this theory, there is virtually no experimental evidence to support it. Displacement theory, another way of looking at forgetting, suggests that every new item we put into our memory knocks out some old memory. Like decay theory, displacement theory has little or no experimental evidence to support it. Two more popular theories are interference theory and loss of access theory. Interference theory argues that memories interfere with each other and that we forget because our memories sometimes damage each other to the point that they are not usable. Loss of access theory says that we actually don't forget anything, that all our memories are still up there. It's just that some are buried so deeply that we can't find them. This theory is currently the most popular with memory theorists.
Unit 18. I am not a psychologist or sociologist. I do have a doctorate in education, but much more important than my doctorate is my delight in my kids. I devote a part of my professional life to entertaining and educating them. I like children. Nothing I've ever done has given me more joys and rewards than being a father to my 5. In all these joys and rewards, of course, has come the natural strife of family life, the little tensions and conflicts that are part of trying to bring civilization to children. The more I have talked about such problems, the more I have found that all other parents had the very same ones, and are relieved to hear me turning them into laughter. Yes, every parent knows the source of this laughter. Come share more of it with me now.
Unit 19. Compared to the great stretches of time that passed before the coming of man, the period that man has been on the earth is very brief. If you think of all the time since the earth's beginning as crowded into one day of 24 hours, then the period of man is only 1 or 2 minutes at the end, perhaps even less than 1. Yet, in this brief span, man, this two-legged animal, has developed to a point of intelligence and ability to do things far beyond that of any other animal since the beginning of life. Thus, he has become the ruler of all the other animals, both great and small. How can one account for this remarkable progress? It is believed that one of the important reasons is that man from the beginning had hands with which to fashion and use tools. The hands grew in their ability to make things and use things, and along with them, the brain grew in its ability to think. If it were possible to meet one of the early people who lived in that period of time, we might not think of him as a person at all. Although no one knows just how he looked, it seems quite sure that he looked very different from the way most people do today.
Unit 20. It is commonly believed that only rich, middle-aged businessmen suffer from stress. In fact, anyone may become ill as a result of stress if they experience a lot of worry over a long period. Stress can be a friend or an enemy. It can warn you that you are under too much pressure and that you should change your way of life. It can kill you if you don't notice the warning signals. When we are very frightened and worried, our body produces certain chemicals to help us fight what is troubling us. These chemicals produce the energy needed to run away fast from an object of fear. But in modern life, that's often impossible. If we don't use up these chemicals, they may actually harm us. The parts of the body that are most affected by stress are the stomach, heart, skin, head, and back. Stress can cause car accidents, heart attacks, and alcoholism, and may even drive people to suicide. As with all illnesses, prevention is better than cure. A very common danger signal is the inability to relax. When you can't enjoy an evening with your friends, when you haven't time for outdoor exercise, that is the time to stop working and ask yourself whether your present life really suits you.
Unit 21. Some time ago, I read a letter I cannot get out of my mind in one of the newspapers. The writer had seen a father and his small, physically handicapped son going up a staircase. The little boy had braces on his legs, and every step was slow and difficult. How easy it would have been for his father to pick him up and carry him to the top of the stairs. Instead, he simply walked by his son's side, gently encouraging him to make the effort. The Japanese writer of the letter said that at first he had pitied the boy for his father's hard-heartedness, but finally understood that the man was showing real love for his son. If he had carried him, the boy would have remained helpless. Instead, he let his son reach the top by his own efforts. He was helping the boy achieve independence and self-respect. I too was impressed when I read this letter, especially since I had seen that very morning a different and perhaps more typically Japanese scene. A boy of 8 or 9, obviously strong and healthy, was standing passively while his mother bent down to tie his shoelace. Children in primary school ought to be able to tie their own shoelaces. Why was the mother treating her son like a 3-year-old?
Unit 22. A week or two later, I thought of these two incidents again, when I came upon a dozen or so junior high school students all bunched together at the foot of an escalator in a subway station. The reason soon became apparent. The escalator had stopped. The middle-aged commuters all sighed with resignation or muttered with frustration and began walking up the staircase. Not so the school children. They stood gazing blankly at the unmoving escalator, apparently waiting passively for somebody to do something about it, just as the boy with his shoelace undone had stood while his mother tied it for him. Why do some parents keep their children helpless? Is it from a desire to serve, or a desire to maintain control. And if there are too many parents like that, where will Japan get its next Nobel Prize winner from? Creative thinkers don't wait for someone else to solve their problems. But the children will doubtless complain. They don't understand the proverb, "You've got to be cruel to be kind."
Unit 23. Children are curious. As soon as they are old enough to observe the world about them, they begin to ask questions. They wonder about all the external world that surrounds them, the change of day and night, of summer and winter, of opening flowers and falling leaves. Their growing sense of wonder includes not only the natural world, which they can see and hear, touch, taste, and smell. They become aware of the human world of people. But our modern way of life holds complexity that is inexplicable to a child unless it is approached historically. Children are, at heart, Robinson Crusoes. They construct primitive shelters and dig caves, even in city backyards, where, for the time being, they discard our civilization and imagine they are beginning human existence afresh, with only their own ingenuity to provide for their needs. In children's interest in beginnings, in their wonder about the life of early man in the morning of the world, they find a perspective. As their knowledge increases, they begin to see in proportion the world of today as it came from the past. Children's instinct to learn comes from their wonderings, their curiosity. The more open their minds are to wonder, the more sensitive they are to the satisfactions and enjoyments our earthly life affords. If they grow insensitive to these because their natural, eager curiosity has nothing to feed upon, the result is boredom, a boredom caused by the lack of those resources of the mind which find never weakened interest in the wonder of the universe.
Unit 24. When a human infant is born into any community, in any part of the world, it has two things in common with any other infant, provided neither of them has been damaged in any way, either before or during birth. Firstly, and most obviously, newborn children are completely helpless. Apart from a powerful capacity to draw attention to their helplessness by using sound, there is nothing the newborn child can do to ensure his own survival. Without care from some other human being or beings, be it mother, grandmother, sister, nurse, or human group, a child is very unlikely to survive. This helplessness of human infants is in marked contrast with the capacity of many newborn animals to get to their feet within minutes of birth and to run with the herd within a few hours. Although young animals are certainly at risk, sometimes for weeks or even months after birth, compared with the human infant, they quickly develop the capacity to fend for themselves. It would seem that this long period of vulnerability is the price that the human species has to pay for the very long learning period which fits man for survival as a species. It is during this very long period, in which the human infant is totally dependent on others, that it reveals the second feature which it shares with all other undamaged human infants, a capacity to learn language.
Unit 25. Music has always been an expression of our hopes and fears. The oldest form of this expression occurs in folk music. It is an unwritten record of the beliefs and attitudes of a culture, passed on by word of mouth directly from one generation to the next. The songs which survive are the people's favorites, A folk song which we hear today may not exactly be the same as the one our ancestors heard. It has changed through interpretation of successive generations. Each culture develops its own songs, which tell tales of heroic leaders, famous battles, and love. One culture may adopt and change songs from another culture. For example, the same tune may appear as a ballad in German and as a Christmas carol in Poland. It is unlikely that the same tune developed independently in each country. Rather, the people in a border region probably taught it to their friends in the nearby country. During the Middle Ages, for example, songs were transferred from one place to another place by wandering musical entertainers or young workmen. If the people like the melody of a song, but not the theme, they will often adopt the tune and replace the original words or the story with something more suitable.
Unit 26. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, summed up the 4 chief qualities of money some 2,000 years ago. It must be lasting and easy to recognize, to divide, and to carry about. When we think of money today, we picture it either as round, flat pieces of metal which we call coins, or as printed paper notes. But there are still parts of the world today where coins and notes are of no use. They will buy nothing, and a traveler might starve if he had none of the particular local money to exchange for food. Among isolated peoples, who are not often reached by traders from outside, commerce usually means barter. Perhaps it is fish for vegetables, meat for grain, or various kinds of food for pots, baskets, or other manufactured goods. For this kind of simple trading, money is not needed, but there is often something that everyone wants and everybody can use, such as salt to flavor food, shells for ornaments, or iron and copper to make into tools and vessels. These things, salt, shells, or metals, are still used as money in out-of-the-way parts of the world today.
Unit 27. Customs and ways of thinking are not always easy to get used to. We seem to be very different, we Americans and our Japanese friends. Yet, we are not. The more we know about each other, the less our differences will seem, and more complete understanding will come eventually if we continue to make meaningful contact with each other. We have become accustomed to British understatement and Irish hyperbole. Why should we not now accept and understand Japanese ambiguity? When we do, we will see that our differences are more apparent than real, and that some of the barriers between us are not barriers, but merely fences. It is hard to know how to give and receive the gift of love, even hard sometimes to recognize it for what it is. Contrary to Western belief, the Japanese are a warm and demonstrative people. If you have reached them and they feel your warmth for them, they will respond with an even greater warmth that has nothing to do with form, politeness, tradition.
Unit 28. The British class system can be divided into 3 groups: the upper class, consisting of aristocrats, the middle class, and the lower or working class. Britain's classes are based more on breeding and social position than money or power. Getting ahead and making money are often seen as line jumping and thus considered rude. For this reason, the classes in Britain change less than those in America. As one novelist has observed, Britain's ruling or upper class rules through prestige, not money. It also rules through education and accent. The expensive boarding schools of Eton, Harrow, and Winchester lead to Oxford and Cambridge, and these to careers in banking, finance, and government service, not industry or commerce. Industry and commerce are reserved for the middle class, which accepts the values of the upper class but lacks its prestige, family background, and titles. Some say it is the middle class that gives Britain its stability. Next comes the lower or working class, referred to by people from other countries as blue-collar workers. Members of this group find it difficult to rise socially because of education, manners, values, and even the language they speak. Prime Minister Thatcher speaks of a country free of class distinction. Curiously, however, she has put back the practice of granting hereditary ranks of nobles, a practice abandoned in the 1960s. Many outsiders believe this rigid class system and the behavior it causes are not good. They have led in part to the nation's decline, both economically and politically.
Unit 29. Meat, poultry, and fish were not originally part of man's diet. Our teeth evolved to deal with tubers and seeds, not flesh. Our digestive systems are those of foragers, not hunters. We cannot gorge ourselves on meat and then go without eating for days, as many carnivores do. Such evolutionary arguments may seem a thin basis for adopting a vegetarian diet today, however. The fact is that meat is a highly concentrated form of nutriment. It is also among the most appetizing foods in the average diet. Its flavors and smells are so thoroughly woven into the traditional Western way of eating that many people find the prospect of doing without it disheartening. Yet, the evidence is that vegetarianism, as a matter of individual choice, is now spreading. For a variety of reasons, a habit that was once regarded as an eccentricity is gaining respect.
Unit 30. A form of enforced vegetarianism is common in many parts of Africa and Asia, where meat costs so much to produce that poorer people are seldom able to eat it. About 18% of the world's population eat less than 10 grams of animal protein per head per day, equivalent to 2 small eggs or 1 cup of milk. But with the spread of affluence, the amount of animal protein eaten in the average diet has been increasing. Vegetarianism in the West is therefore less a matter of economic necessity than of choice. The number of voluntary vegetarians in Europe and the U.S. is estimated at several million. Some are motivated by aesthetic or moral ideas. They deplore the killing of animals and some of the methods raising them for food. Some base their choice on economics. It is more efficient to use land for growing food directly than for feeding animals. Still others simply believe a vegetarian diet is more healthy.
Unit 31. In its earlier years, the United States was thought of as a melting pot. At first, many people came to America from similar backgrounds in Northern Europe. The early immigrants continued to come mainly from that area, and they were therefore easily absorbed. Later, the Western pioneers, lonely in the vast wilderness and together facing great hardships and dangers, were drawn to their neighbors of whatever origin. Differences tended to diminish. Thus developed the melting pot idea that Americans of various backgrounds should abandon the customs and languages of the old country and be absorbed into American life. People thought that the United States should serve as a melting pot and produce a homogeneous population. However, This ideal became difficult to obtain in the latter part of the 19th century, when very large numbers of immigrants began to arrive, mostly from Eastern and Southern Europe. For these newcomers, assimilation was much harder because of the great differences between their cultures and languages and those of the established Americans. The children of these immigrants, however, learned American ways quickly by imitating their schoolmates. They avoided the customs and languages of their parents and grandparents, even feeling ashamed of their non-American ways and their broken English.
Unit 32. The early colonists and pioneers believed strongly in freedom and equality. These ideals were well suited to the new country. There was plenty of room for differences in religion and politics. There was also much work to be done to settle and develop the land. On the frontier, one person's axe was as good as another's, regardless of the person's beliefs. In various ways, these ideals were written into the laws of the United States. Families in the United States have an average of 3.39 members. The American ideals of freedom and equality extend into the family. American women are noted for their independence. They participate equally with men in many activities outside the home. Almost half of all married women have jobs outside the home.